Dead men tell no tales, but their ships speak volumes. Welcome to the Cursed Compass, where we explore the darkest maritime mysteries.
The Flying Dutchman is the definitive maritime ghost story, a phantom 17th century galleon emerging from the fog, captained by a man doomed to sail the oceans forever without ever making port. Historians view the Dutchman as an accretive folklore construct. It is an engineered cultural meme, built over centuries by layering disparate facts, regional fears, and artistic interpretations onto a single spectral image. This process of accretion means the myth didn't happen all at once. It absorbed variables from different eras, the corporate anxieties of the 1600s, the physical anomalies of the ocean, and 19th century moralizing literature. To deconstruct the ghost ship, we have to isolate its three foundational pillars: 17th century global economics, the physics of atmospheric optics, and the narrative framework of Romantic literature. We begin with a blank slate, a technical 3D wireframe of a standard 17th century Dutch flute cargo vessel. Understanding the Dutchman requires stripping away the campfire ghost story to reveal the engineered cultural phenomenon beneath. The legend originates in the 17th century golden age of the Dutch East India Company, or VOC. This was the world's first multinational corporation, a government-backed trading cartel with unprecedented global reach. This map shows the economic pressure of the VOC network. Huge amounts of capital were tied up in ships traveling from the Netherlands around the southern tip of Africa to the spice markets of Java. Speed and survival were the primary metrics of success. The critical bottleneck in this global system was the Cape of Good Hope. At the Cape, the convergence of major ocean currents creates some of the most hazardous weather on the planet. For a wooden VOC merchant ship, this was a site of frequent and devastating loss. Historical records from this era highlight Captain Bernard Fouquet, a real Dutch mariner famous for completing the transit to Java at speeds that seemed physically impossible for the time. Fouquet's transit times were so extreme that his contemporaries struggled to explain them through seamanship alone. Early maritime superstitions suggested his speed was the result of a demonic pact. The combination of intense corporate pressure and a deadly geographical bottleneck created an ideal environment for sailors to interpret survival through a supernatural lens. History explains the fear, but physics explains the sightings. For centuries, sailors reported seeing glowing ships that appeared to hover or fly above the horizon. These visual anomalies were the result of atmospheric optics, specifically the interaction of light with thermal inversions. The phenomenon is known as looming, or a superior mirage, frequently called a Fata Morgana. This diagram shows the mechanics of a thermal inversion. When cold air sits directly on the ocean surface, with warmer air above it, the layers create different refractive indices. As light rays pass through these layers, they physically bend. This bending light can project the image of a ship located well beyond the physical horizon upward into the sky. To an observer on another vessel, the ship appears to be floating in midair. These specific mirages often cause the projected image to appear inverted or distorted. The atmospheric scattering adds a hazy, spectral glow that matches the descriptions of phantom ships reported for generations. Modern photography provides empirical proof of this phenomenon. The superior mirage remains a documented reality of life at sea. Early sailors were observing genuine physical anomalies. They simply lacked the scientific framework to describe them as optical refractions rather than ghosts. In the late 18th century, these localized oral traditions and optical observations began to be documented by the printing press. The first print reference in 1790 by John MacDonald describes the Flying Dutchman simply as a weather omen at the Cape, a phantom vision that sailors associated with approaching storms. The legend shifted significantly in 1803 with the work of Scottish poet John Leyden. Leyden introduced the motif of eternal penance. He suggested the crew were guilty of a dreadful crime and were ordained to traverse the ocean until their period of penance expired. The myth reached its definitive form in the May 1821 issue of Blackwood's magazine. This text provided the narrative blueprint that still defines the ghost ship today. The Blackwood story established the captain's name as Hendrick van der Decken. his curse for swearing at the wind, and the unsettling motif of the phantom crew offering letters addressed to people long since dead. Over a span of 30 years, literature turned a physical weather anomaly into a rigid narrative of eternal damnation. By the late 19th century, this literary framework influenced institutional naval thinking, coloring the perceptions of highly trained observers. A detailed log entry from July 11, 1881, on the Royal Navy vessel HMS Inconstant provides a critical case study. The author of this official log was Prince George of Wales, the future King George V. His status as a trained naval officer makes his detailed observation particularly significant. He recorded seeing a strange red light and a phantom ship all aglow that stood out in strong relief against the night sky. The log specifies that upon approach, there was no vestige nor any sign of a material ship. This matches the behavior of a mirage breaking down as the observer's position changes. Yet the prince described the event using the established language of the ghost story. Even professional observers were interpreting real optical events through a century-old literary framework. By the mid-19th century, the myth had decoupled from its geographical origins. The Flying Dutchman was no longer a hazard at the Cape, it was a universal symbol. Richard Wagner's 1843 opera, The Flying Dutchman, acted as a catalyst for this transition. Wagner introduced a significant narrative shift, the concept of redemption through love. The captain is allowed to step ashore once every 7 years to seek a faithful partner who can release him from his curse. This romanticized adjustment let the myth evolve into a flexible cinematic trope in the 20th century. Films like the 1951 production Pandora and the Flying Dutchman moved the legend to the Mediterranean, focusing entirely on the romanticized search for redemption rather than the maritime hazard. Today, the Dutchman serves as a metaphor for cyclical trauma in the Twilight Zone and has evolved into the cursed Davy Jones of modern cinema. The Flying Dutchman survives because it is a perfect composite, a genuine optical anomaly codified by romantic literature that encapsulates an eternal human anxiety regarding the indifference of nature and the weight of our own hubris.